Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Metamorphosis, which is episode 2 of season 2 of Star Trek The Original Series. This video is part of a series of videos where I cover every episode of Star Trek The Original Series, one episode at a time. In this video I cover the second season episode, Metamorphosis. So Metamorphosis is the episode where Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are in the shuttlecraft taking Federation Commissioner Nancy Hedford, who requires immediate medical attention. She's upset because she was in the middle of negotiating a cease to a war, but they said that McCoy says that this disease will kill her soon if not treated. However, on their way back to the Enterprise, they are intercepted by a strange alien who takes them to a strange planet where they seem to be stranded. There they meet a human being who finally they identify as Zefram Cochrane, the inventor of warp drive, who reportedly died 150 years ago. However, he reports that the energy being the same one that brought them there kept him alive, and the energy being he refers to as the companion. And apparently they discover that the companion brought Kirk and the others there because Zefram Cochrane said that if he was not returned to his own kind, he would die, thinking that the companion might let him leave, but instead they brought more humans there to join him. Meanwhile, Nancy Redford's condition gets even worse, and so the situation gets even dire. So Kirk tries in vain to negotiate with the companion for their release, but eventually Nancy's health comes to she's near death and almost dead from the disease, and Kirk finds out that the companion is in fact in love with Zefram Cochrane, and he tries to convince the companion that Zefram Cochrane will die if he doesn't leave, because his spirit will die. So eventually the companion decides to merge with Nancy Redford, saving her life and allowing the companion to live as a human being in order to love Zefram Cochrane. And the merging, however, saves Nancy's life, but they're unable to leave the asteroid because the companion is tied to it, and if the companion left, they both would die. So Zefram Cochrane elects to stay with the companion / Nancy and live a happy life as a happy couple on the planet, and then he tells Kirk not to let anyone know that he's still alive, and Kirk agrees. So, I've always liked this episode. I think maybe I like it a little less now than I used to, but I still like it. I think it's a decent sort of love romance type episode. Well, it's kind of touching, and it's actually done kind of well. It is interesting looking at this in retrospect after Star Trek First Contact, where we meet a younger version of Zefram Cochrane, who of course acts nothing like this version of Zefram Cochrane. Now, one could try to rationalize, because it's always tricky when you have the same character played by two different actors, because they always don't match up. But here the difference is very stark, where this seems like, a really normal guy who is like, all about wanting to explore space, how he said he wanted to die in space, and he just seems like a really nice guy, whereas the Zefram Cochrane we met in First Contact was a drunk and a curmudgeon and only cared about dollar signs, money. But apparently we're led to believe that after he didn't invent warp drive, he actually did become more of a philosopher, as was implied in First Contact, with Riker saying he once said, "Don't try to be a great man, just be a man." and having quote, we even hear him referenced a lot in Enterprise, which is a lot closer to his time, and we see a speech from him where he talks about exploring space and going boldly, whatnot. So we are meant to believe that he did reform, but still, it does seem like this is a far cry. Now, I can buy it because this Zefram Cochrane we meet has lived 150 years more. He was rejuvenated to look at a younger age, and had a more helpful, hopeful life, and kind of gave up the booze. He had to be off it for at least 150 years. So I can kind of buy it. It does seem like a stark contract. Obviously, the first contact version of Zefram Cochrane wasn't thought up for another 30 years after this episode was made. And then so if anything's inconsistent, it's that. But of course, that version of Zefram Cochrane is more prominent in current day Star Trek lore. So this is the episode that seems out of place now. Also, the other thing is Spock says refers to Zefram Cochrane as Zefram Cochrane of Alpha Centauri, which is the closest star to our solar system. So I think they were implying he was actually... I think there was some B materials, but that came out way before First Contact came out, that was suggesting he was actually from Alpha Centauri, that he's an alien from that planet. But of course, that's inconsistent with First Contact, and so the others will try to suggest that he colonized. There was a colony that colonized Alpha Centauri after warp drive was discovered, and he was amongst them. You could try to fit that into the First Contact lore, but it still doesn't really add up to me, because let's say he was in his 50s. He looks to be in his 50s during First Contact, and in this episode he mentions that he went out into space to die at the age of 80, or history records him dying at 80. So that gives around 30 years, or just under 30 years, for there to be a colony set up on Alpha Centauri, and for him to move there and be known as being of Alpha Centauri. It's unlikely. I personally don't try to headcanon this or fansplain it. I just dismiss it as a retconned line, which is fine. You can retcon things. I think that line was kind of dumb anyway, so I just ignore it now. But that's just me personally. Yeah, and so it's interesting that Zefram Cochrane was still alive, but Kirk, I think very arrogant of Kirk not to let anyone know that this historical figure still lives. I mean, I don't see why, the Federation or other historical scholars maybe would be able to... I mean, Zefram Cochrane can't leave this asteroid, but other people could come to him. Wouldn't he enjoy visitors? I don't understand why he was like, don't tell them about me. Because he's been stranded alone with no one except the companion. In fact, he was going on and on about how great it was to see Kirk and the others. Wouldn't he want some fucking company? And maybe this just is the most distant thing from the First Contact version, because if the First Contact version would love to gloat and bask and talk about how great, maybe he would want more dollar signs money. No, not really, but he's sad to grow beyond that, but still, and we know that he is humble and he doesn't want to be seen as this big historical figure. Maybe he doesn't want people talking about the statue that they built for him, but still, I feels like he would want some damn visitors, maybe someone to bring some rock and roll music. I know. First Contact wasn't written for another 30 years, but still, leaving behind anything we know about First Contact, I think he would want some visitors, personally. And I think it's a crime on history for Kirk to not correct the record of what happened to Zefram Cochrane, personally. But anyway, I guess this is one thing that annoyed me about the episode. I'm usually, as I talk about, not a fan of the shuttlecraft crash episode. I don't understand why Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are in the shuttle bringing this commissioner back. Why didn't the Enterprise go get the commissioner in the first place? That way they wouldn't have to travel to because it would be one thing if they were traveling to a star base where they had superior medical facilities. They were taking her to the Enterprise. So why didn't the Enterprise simply go to her? Now, you could say it was a scheduling thing, like the Enterprise had to do some other relief mission at the time, and so Kirk was going there to retrieve her, and they were going to meet in the middle. But I don't know. It seems to me if it was such a dire medical emergency, which it was because she was going to die without treatment, that the Enterprise should have, just went to her. But then, of course, if it did, this episode wouldn't happen. So there you go. So in other words, plot contrivance. Now, this commissioner does come off as annoying. And to be fair, she is being a bit ridiculous because she's constantly complaining about, oh, why'd you take me away from this war? And she's going to die. McCoy tries to if we didn't, you'd be dead. Yeah, I'll be careful. You'll be dead. Sorry. Yeah, so that's kind of ridiculous that she complains about this, and she's complaining about most of the episode, and then they have her break down and into hysterics for no reason, when Zephyr Cochrane mentions that the companion won't let them leave and whatever, and she breaks down into hysterics. I'm not going to get into this again, but I don't like the way that the original series portrays women, and I'll just leave it at that. I mean, I do like how they have this high-ranking Federation commissioner who is seen as someone who can bring about peace between warring factions, but then they play her as a curmudgeon who's just complaining for no reason and breaks out into hysterics. You could argue, well, she's close to death, but still, I don't see the original series portraying a male character. Well, actually, no, they would. I scratched that. This is the original series, after all. But still, I don't know. I just get the whole vibe of hysterical women from her outbursts there. But anyway, so Zephyr Cochrane, yeah, I don't know. 150 years is a long time to be trapped by himself. And him being obtuse to the fact that the companion was in love with him, I don't know how much I buy that. And him being disgusted by it when Kirk points it out. Yeah, I don't know about that either. But I do think this is, as I said, I think it's a nice love story, because I think the episode does a really good job of establishing the companion, which is, just a visual blob. And so that's actually an accomplishment that they're able to take this visual effect and make it seem like a fully fleshed out character and make you care about it, and totally sell you the connection between the companion and Cochrane. And then when the companion takes over Nancy's body, it actually is, it's quite touching that it saved Nancy's life, but at the same time, and that they're both there. It's like a symbiosis joining. It's not like the companion completely took it over. It's kind of like a trill where they're both there. And it's interesting that and that Nancy kind of, I think, because she talked about how sad it was that Zephyr was loved and he's rejecting it, and so I think she kind of had a thing for him a little bit. He definitely would talk about how beautiful she was, but I don't think that's this is the way that people talk. Maybe they talk this way in the 60s, but it just seems wrong to me when he first meets her and he's he meets all four of them, but then he sees Nancy as oh, a woman, and a beautiful one at that. Did people really talk like that? I don't know. And of course, she's like off put because she's dying and being trapped on this planet where she's gonna die, which is, whatever. But yes, I do find it a kind of touching love story that the companion like sacrifices its life because it's immortal basically, and it sacrifices its life in order to understand Cochrane better, even just for a couple hours, because she just assumed that Cochrane would leave once because she couldn't stop her. I think personally though, I think it's really sad for Nancy's character because she, she doesn't die, but then she becomes trapped on this planet when she was like going to like so hard on negotiating peace between two warring factions, and that was her life. So maybe I don't buy it as much that she's willing to just go, "I'll fuck all that and I'll stay here," and well, she, to be fair, she's a new entity, but the way that the companion talks is like part of me understands but part of me doesn't, referring to like Nancy, like when Zephyrin says something relating to humans, like the Nancy part that's Nancy understands, but the part that's the companion doesn't. So couldn't the companion be like, part of me wants to stay here, but part of me wants to get the fuck out of here and negotiate peace between two warring factions? But whatever. So it's not a perfect episode, but I still like the resolution at the end, and I think, as I said, it was a really big accomplishment to sell the romance between this blob of light. And I think the actress who plays Nancy does a really good job, and especially at the part at the end where the companion merges with her. And it was interesting, the scene where she has that skirt and she's like looking through it, and then the skirt is actually the same colors as the companion, and apparently that was not by design. That whole sequence was not scripted. It was just something the director just happened to notice on set when filming, that the skirt that the costume department gave for her was the same color that they're going to use for the companion. So they just improvised that scene where she was looking through it, so it's like the companion trying to, seeing through different eyes and maybe trying to see what it was used to perceive. That's a nice touch, actually. That's actually shows people that care about their craft. And the way that she portrayed, the companion and Nancy together was really interesting and was really touching. And I actually would want to see more of this. There was this episode, the B-canon novel called Star Trek Federation, which came out before First Contact came out, which told the backstory of Zephyrin Cochrane, which First Contact completely retconned and wiped away, because it was totally, rather than being the inventing the warp drive during aftermath of World War III. He was doing it during World War III and was involved in some of these factions fighting them, and there was a feud and blah blah, and he had like a nemesis, and he wasn't a drunk who just sat in a bar and listened to rock and roll. And I can't remember exactly what happened in that novel, but I do remember that somehow Zephyrin Cochrane met up with Picard, so part of it took place in Kirk's time and another part took place in Picard's time. And I can't remember if the companion actually left the planet and was with them, or if he was alone. I think she did. For me, that would be more interesting if they found the way for the companion to leave the planet and they actually went off exploring. But, it's been over like 30 years since I read that book, so I don't really remember it. But let me talk about a nitpick now that I had with this episode. Something that really bothered me, probably my biggest nitpick, is when Kirk was trying to negotiate with the companion to let them leave. I think he was doing a really shitty job at it. He would mention offhand that because the companion is like, oh, if the man doesn't have company, then the man will cease to exist. And then Kirk's like, oh, well, yeah, one of us will cease to exist if you don't let her leave. But he didn't emphasize that. And earlier, Kirk asked Cochrane, oh, you can communicate with the companion. Could you possibly get the companion to, heal Nancy Redford so she doesn't die? And he just comes back later and is like, nah, companion can do nothing for her. Like, why not? Like, we see her do it at the end of the episode, and we see that she could rejuvenate Zephyr Cochrane to a younger age and keep him that age, that appearance, forever. So I don't see why he wouldn't be able to do the same thing for Nancy. But throwing that out the window, getting back to Kirk's negotiating skills, he keeps emphasizing that the Zephyr Cochrane will cease to exist if she doesn't let him go. It's like, the man will cease to exist if you don't let her go, and let him go. And then the companion is just like, that is not logical. That does not make sense. The man will continue, and she's right. like Kirk's argument is stupid. And eventually Kirk finally says, his body will continue, but his spirit will cease to exist. And which is more what the point, but he keeps hammering that point over and over again. The man will cease to exist if you don't let him go. But that's actually not true. And even you say, okay, fine, he means like his spirit will cease to exist. That's something that the companion doesn't fully comprehend and understand. So instead of hammering that point down and keep coming back to that point, why doesn't he instead focus on the fact that one of them's gonna fucking die without medical attention? He should keep hammering that point and being like, Nancy Redford has got a disease. She is going to cease to exist if you don't let us go. And that will destroy our spirits. You have to let us go. You can't. By keeping us here, you are killing her. But no, he doesn't emphasize that. And the companion seems well-meaning, honestly. And so I think if how in Ultimate Computer now how he guilt tripped M5 into killing destroying itself, seemed like he could guilt trip her. You're being a murderer. You are murdering us. But he doesn't do that. Well, I don't know, because the argument would work and the plot doesn't want the argument to work, so they could have the ending be the way it is. So in that case, the ending does seem contrived. Plus, as I said, I feel it's a kind of a sad ending for Nancy, even though that she's stuck on this planet. I think maybe this should have actually let her live. Now, I also love how some Spock and McCoy mentions to Kirk, what about those those war that's going to happen where, millions of people are dying and she's not going to be able to stop it. And Kirk's like, they can find another commissioner or whatever. That's fine. That's a very cavalier attitude, Mr. Kirk. What if another commissioner probably wouldn't be able to do as good of a job as she was, because it seems like she had been there for a while, knew all the players. They were probably more willing to work with her, and she knew the position, and it seemed like she was in a good position. From the way she was talking about how urgent it was, it did seem like millions of people were going to die in this war, and that she had the best chance of doing it, and that someone else would probably, even if they could pull it off, it would probably take a lot longer, in which case a lot of people would die. So millions of people are dying, and Kirk's like, it'll be fine. What a shitty attitude. What a bad captain. I'm sorry to have that kind of attitude. Of course, at this point, there's nothing they can do about it, but still, I mean, to have that fucking attitude about a bloody war happening and that it's his fault for that it'll keep going and be like, who cares? Get over it. Yeah. Not a good Kirk moment, in my opinion. Now, of course, I would like to thank all of my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. It does keep this channel alive and going and kicking, and is very much appreciated. We have Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky Matty Jester, Joel Lavals, Brian A., Alessandro Miguelicio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neal Howells. Thank you so much for your support on Enchantment of Eternity. Give it here. Anyway, let me read now some comments from some Patreon supporters that leave their comments for this episode. First comment is from Brandon Neal Howells, who says, I want to like this episode more than I do, but the Assistant Federation Commissioner Nancy Hedford is such a whiny little bitch that I believe she deserves Sakura's disease. The majority of the episode she's either weeping or screaming, and it's hard to feel any sympathy for a character portrayed that way. Cochrane is fine with the companion looking after him until he discovers that it is a female and loves him, and then his attitude changes to total revulsion, and the episode loses me. But it's all good because the companion cures the dying commissioner and lives happily ever after with Cochrane after telling Kirk to keep their existence a secret. A product of his time, which does not age well. 5 out of 5. Alright, so next comment is from Matty Jester. I'm not a big fan of this episode. I don't find it particularly interesting or memorable. It's nice to see a sober Zephyrin Cochrane. I wonder if he built a jukebox in that house. The ending is a bit flippant. What about the horrible war? Oh, they'll find someone else. It'll be fine. So the stakes weren't that high in the first place, I guess. 5 ooby doobies out of 10. Ooby dooby doo-wah. Anyway. Yeah, they were flipping about the war. Yes, indeed. So next comment is from Ricky. This episode is fine. I mean, it's the Zephyrin Cochrane episode, although I will say that the portrayal of Cochrane is much better than the First Contact version. But besides that, this episode is okay. It's nothing special. It does drag in certain areas. I did like the interactions with the Cloud and how the Cloud became one with the Commissioner. That was touching, but like I said, nothing much to it. So a 5 out of 10. So everyone gave this episode a 5 out of 10. They're all in agreement, except for me, because my rating for Metamorphosis out of 10 is a 7. Very good. I actually like this episode. Now, a 7's not a ringing endorsement. It's not an 8. It's not a 9. I'm not saying this episode's a masterpiece or like really great, but it's watchable. Like, it's good. Like, it's enjoyable, and I think the ending is contrived as it is, and how flippant they are about this war that's going on does annoy me, which is why it doesn't get an 8. But I still think it's really powerful. I think it's commendable the job they did building up this relationship between a blob of lights and a person, and then resolving it and tying into this dying woman and resolving it with this storyline. To me it works. So again, I probably liked this episode more when I was younger, but I still like it now. And yeah, I wouldn't call it like one of the best of season 2, but it's definitely one of the more watchable ones. So yeah, that is my rating for this episode. So thank you so much for watching my review, and now let me sort of bring up the schedule here to see what is coming up next. So next we have on the channel this Wednesday will be Friday's Child. And I just realized I should have released this episode on the review on Friday for Friday's Child. Get it? But sorry, the schedule just didn't work that way. So Friday's Child's going to come on Wednesday. And on Friday is actually going to be Who Mourns for Adonis. And then next Monday, my review for Amok Time. So yes. lots of more Star Trek videos and other videos on other shows I also do on my channel, eventually and whatnot. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.